Commander Vextar stepped off his transport ship and looked around the human military academy with barely hidden disgust. The buildings were made of simple stone and metal, nothing like the crystal spires of his home world. These humans were supposed to be warriors? They looked more like farmers playing at war. The alien commander stood 7 feet tall with 4 arms and skin that changed colors based on his mood. Right now it was a deep purple, showing his annoyance. He had come to this backward planet only because the Galactic Council insisted that humans be given a chance to join their alliance. What a waste of time. Admiral Kim Tae-ho walked forward to greet him. The human was much shorter than Vexitar, with gray hair and calm eyes. He wore a simple uniform without the fancy decorations that most military leaders preferred. This made Vextar even more annoyed. Did this human not understand the importance of this visit? "Welcome to Earth Military Academy, Commander Vextar," Admiral Kim said with a slight bow. "We are honored by your presence." Vextar's skin shifted to a lighter purple. At least the human showed proper respect. "I am here to evaluate your military capabilities," he said in his booming voice. "The Council wants to know if humans can contribute anything useful to our forces." "Of course," Admiral Kim replied. "We have prepared a full tour of our facilities. I think you will find our methods interesting." Captain Park Ji-woo joined them as they walked toward the main building. He was younger than the Admiral, with scars on his hands that spoke of real combat experience. Vextar noted this but was not impressed. Scars just meant the human had been careless in battle. "Tell me about your weapons," Vextar demanded as they entered the academy. "What is your most advanced technology?" Admiral Kim smiled slightly. "We believe the most advanced weapon is the human mind, Commander. But let me show you our history first." They entered a large hall filled with displays and artifacts. Vextar expected to see primitive swords and crude guns. Instead, he found himself looking at detailed maps and charts showing conflicts across human history. The numbers made him pause. "This battle here," Admiral Kim pointed to a display, 60 million humans died in just 6 years. Vextar's skin flickered between purple and orange. 60 million? That seems excessive for a territorial dispute. It was not about territory, Captain Park explained. It was about ideas. About which system of government would control the planet. The alien commander studied the display more carefully. The humans had fought this war on multiple continents at the same time. They had built weapons capable of destroying entire cities. They had continued fighting even when their homelands were invaded and their capitals burned. "You fought your own species to extinction over ideas?" Vextar asked. "Not to extinction," Admiral Kim corrected. "We survived. We learned. We became stronger." They moved to another display showing a more recent conflict. This one showed humans fighting over basic resources like water and food. The casualties were smaller, but the duration was longer. 20 years of constant warfare across multiple planets as humans spread into space. "You fought over water?" Vextar was confused. His people had never fought wars over such basic things. Technology made such conflicts unnecessary. "When you have no choice, you fight with whatever you have," Captain Park said. "We learned to win wars even when we started with nothing." Cadet Lee So-min approached their group. She was young, maybe 20 human years, with alert eyes that reminded Vextar uncomfortably of a predator studying prey. She carried herself with confidence that seemed unusual for someone so young. "Commander Vexistar," Admiral Kim said. "This is one of our top students. Cadet Lee specializes in tactical warfare." The young human bowed respectfully. "Sir, would you like to know about our current training methods?" Vextar looked down at her with amusement. "Child, I have been fighting wars since before your planet joined the galactic community. What could you possibly teach me?" Cadet Lee's expression did not change. "Nothing, sir. But perhaps you would like to observe how we prepare for conflicts we have never fought before." The alien commander felt a strange chill at her words. There was something in the way she spoke that suggested she was not making idle conversation. "What do you mean?" "We study every species in the galaxy," she explained. "We analyze their strengths, their weaknesses, their fighting styles. We prepare for wars that may never happen, against enemies we have never met." Admiral Kim gestured toward a doorway. "Perhaps we should continue the tour. I think you will find our combat training facilities educational." As they walked, Vextar found himself thinking about what he had seen. The humans had fought massive wars against their own species and somehow survived. They had killed millions of their own kind over ideas and resources. They studied conflicts that had not happened yet. This was not normal behavior for a civilized species. Most races fought only when necessary, using technology to avoid losses. They made war surgical and precise. But humans seemed to approach warfare as if it were a natural state of existence. "Tell me," Vexitar said to Admiral Kim, "how many wars has your species fought?" The Admiral thought for a moment. "Counting major conflicts? Perhaps 1,000 in recorded history. But if you include smaller disputes, tribal conflicts, and civil wars, it would be difficult to calculate. 1,000 wars?" Vextar's skin went completely orange with shock. "My people have fought perhaps 12 conflicts in our entire history. Different species develop differently," Admiral Kim said calmly. "Some are naturally peaceful. Others must learn peace through understanding war." Captain Park added, "We believe that the best way to prevent war is to be so good at it that enemies choose not to fight you." They reached the end of the historical exhibit. Vextar looked back at the displays showing thousands of years of human conflict. Each war had been fought with increasing intensity and sophistication. Each generation of humans had learned from the previous one's mistakes. "Your species has been at war for its entire existence," he said slowly. "Not at war," Admiral Kim corrected. "Preparing for war. There is a difference." Cadet Lee stepped forward again. "Sir, if I may ask, how does your species handle conflicts?" Vextar straightened proudly. "We use diplomacy first. If that fails, we demonstrate superior technology until the enemy surrenders. Most conflicts end within days. And if the enemy does not surrender?" she asked. "They always surrender. Our technology makes resistance pointless." The young human nodded thoughtfully. "What happens if you fight an enemy with better technology than yours?" The question caught Vextar off guard. In all his years of military service, he had never considered such a possibility. The hegemony had the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. No one could match their technological superiority. "That situation does not arise," he said finally. "But if it did," Cadet Lee pressed gently. Vextar found himself unable to answer. His military training had never covered scenarios where his forces might be technologically inferior. Why would it? The hegemony's strength came from their advanced weapons and superior numbers. Admiral Kim watched this exchange with interest. "Shall we continue to the training facilities? I think you will find our combat simulations illuminating." As they left the historical exhibits, Vexitar felt increasingly uncomfortable. Something about the humans' approach to warfare was fundamentally different from anything he had encountered. They seemed to assume that conflict was inevitable and that they would always be at a disadvantage. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to have built their entire military philosophy around this assumption. They trained not to win easy victories, but to survive impossible defeats. Vextar's skin remained orange as they walked toward the combat training areas. He was beginning to suspect that this inspection might reveal more than he had bargained for. Captain Park led them into a large training facility that looked nothing like the combat centers Vextar knew. Instead of clean practice rooms with energy weapons, he saw rough terrain that had been built to look like different worlds. There were areas that looked like deserts, forests, and even the inside of spaceships. "This is our main simulation center," Captain Park explained. "We can recreate almost any battlefield environment." Vextar looked around with mild interest. "Standard practice facilities. Though yours seem primitive." "Perhaps," Admiral Kim said, "but they serve our purposes. Would you like to observe a training exercise?" Before Vextar could answer, alarms began sounding. Human cadets rushed into the facility from different entrances. They moved with purpose but not panic, like they had done this many times before. Colonel Choi Hyun-sik approached their group. He was an older human with steady eyes and the bearing of someone who had seen real combat. "Admiral, we are beginning Exercise 7. The scenario is planetary defense against superior forces." "Excellent timing," Admiral Kim said. "Commander Vextar, this will show you how we train our future officers." The exercise began with cadets taking positions throughout the facility. Vextar expected to see them using advanced weapons and coordinated tactics. Instead, he watched something that made his skin shift from orange to a worried yellow. The cadets were given a scenario where their enemy had better weapons, more soldiers, and control of the sky. Their mission was not to win a glorious victory. Their mission was to make the enemy's victory so costly that it would not be worth achieving. Cadet Han Min-ho led one group. He was a thin human who looked more like a scholar than a warrior. But as Vextar watched, the young man began implementing tactics that made the alien commander's blood run cold. His team is setting up what we call harassment positions, Captain Park explained. They will not try to stop the enemy advance. Instead, they will slow it down and make it expensive. Vextar watched as Han Min-ho's team used the terrain to set traps and ambush points. They moved constantly, never staying in one position long enough to be targeted effectively. When they attacked, they aimed for supply lines and support units rather than the main fighting force. This is not honorable combat, Vextar protested. Where are the direct engagements? The proper formations? Dead, Admiral Kim said simply. In this scenario, traditional tactics would result in total defeat within hours. So we used different methods. Another group was led by Cadet Yoon Da-eun, a small human female who moved through the artificial terrain like she had been born there. Her team's mission was even more disturbing. They were supposed to operate behind enemy lines after their main forces had been defeated. Vextar watched as Yoon Da-eun demonstrated how to make weapons from basic materials found in any environment. She showed her team how to turn simple chemicals into explosives, how to modify communication equipment into tracking devices, and how to use civilian infrastructure for military purposes. You teach them to be terrorists, Vextar said, his skin now bright yellow with distress. We teach them to be survivors, Colonel Choi corrected. In real war, the enemy will not give you fair conditions. They will not provide you with proper weapons. They will not respect your rules of engagement. The exercise continued for 2 hours. Vextar watched scenario after scenario where human cadets faced impossible odds and found ways to continue fighting. They practiced fighting in damaged spacesuits, operating with severe injuries, and maintaining communication when their equipment was destroyed. Most disturbing of all was a scenario where cadets had to continue their mission after being captured and tortured. They practiced resisting interrogation while appearing to cooperate. They learned to pass information to rescue teams while seeming completely broken. This is barbaric, Vextar declared. No civilized species subjects their soldiers to such training. Captain Park looked at him with genuine curiosity. How do your people train for combat? We practice with our weapons until we achieve perfect accuracy, Vextar explained. We study tactical formations and coordinate our movements. We learn to use our technology effectively. And if your technology fails, Vextar stared at him. Our technology does not fail. But if it did? The alien commander found himself unable to answer. In all his military experience, he had never considered fighting without his advanced equipment. The idea was as foreign to him as breathing underwater. Cadet Lee So-min approached them again. This time she was covered in dirt and carrying what looked like a weapon made from scrap metal and electronic components. How did the exercise go? Admiral Kim asked her. Team Red achieved their objectives, she reported. We held the enemy advance for 6 hours and destroyed approximately 30% of their supply chain. Casualties were acceptable. What were the casualties? Vextar asked. 80% of defending forces, she said without emotion. But the mission parameters were met. Vextar's skin went white with shock. 80% casualties are acceptable? For a delaying action against superior forces, yes, Lee So-min explained. The goal was not to preserve the defending force. The goal was to buy time for civilian evacuation and preparation of secondary defensive positions. Admiral Kim gestured toward another area of the training facility. Perhaps you would like to see our equipment training. They moved to a section where cadets were practicing with various weapons. Vextar expected to see advanced energy rifles and sophisticated targeting systems. Instead, he saw humans learning to fight with knives, clubs, and primitive projectile weapons. Why do you train with such outdated equipment? He asked. Because advanced weapons can be taken away from you, Captain Park explained. But these basic skills cannot be removed. Cadet Han Min-ho demonstrated this principle by showing how to turn any piece of metal into a cutting weapon. He explained how to use furniture as shields, how to create distractions with simple objects, and how to fight effectively even when badly outnumbered. Your people seem to assume they will always be at a disadvantage, Vextar observed. We prepare for the worst possible scenario, Colonel Choi said. If we can fight effectively when we have nothing, then having something makes us incredibly dangerous. The combat simulations continued throughout the day. Vextar watched humans practice fighting in zero gravity, underwater, in toxic atmospheres, and even in environments that would kill most species. They trained to operate equipment they had never seen before, and to improvise solutions when standard procedures failed. Every exercise assumed that the humans would be outnumbered, outgunned, and fighting for their survival. Yet in scenario after scenario, they found ways to achieve their objectives or at least make their defeat so costly that it hardly counted as victory for their enemies. "There is something I do not understand," Vextar said as the day's training ended. "Your people have never fought aliens. You have no experience with galactic warfare. So why do you train for scenarios that involve superior technology and overwhelming force?" Admiral Kim smiled, but there was something cold in his expression. "Commander, humans have been fighting each other for thousands of years. We have learned that in any conflict, someone has an advantage. Someone has better weapons, more soldiers, or superior position. So we always assume that we are not the ones with the advantage," the Admiral explained. "We train to win when we should lose. We prepare to fight enemies who are better than us in every measurable way." Captain Park added, "It is better to be ready for an impossible war that never comes than to be unprepared for an easy war that does." As they left the combat simulation area, Vextar felt deeply unsettled. The humans were not just training for war. They were training for wars of annihilation, conflicts where survival itself was victory. Most alien species trained to demonstrate their superiority and force quick surrenders. Humans trained to endure any amount of punishment and continue fighting. They seemed to view warfare not as a tool of diplomacy, but as a natural state of existence. Vextar's skin remained white as they walked toward the next area of the academy. He was beginning to understand that human military thinking was fundamentally different from anything he had encountered in the galaxy, and that difference was starting to frighten him. Master Sergeant Oh Sung-jun met them at the entrance to what the humans called their survival training facility. He was a compact man with scars that told stories of serious injuries survived. When he shook hands with Vextar, the alien noticed that 2 of his fingers were missing. "Combat injury?" Vextar asked, gesturing at the missing digits. "Training accident," Oh Sung-jun replied with a slight smile. "Learned a valuable lesson about improvised explosives that day." Vextar's skin flickered between white and yellow. These humans injured themselves during training? His own people used holographic simulations specifically to avoid such risks. "Sergeant O will show you our advanced survival protocols," Admiral Kim explained. "These prepare our soldiers for the worst possible scenarios." They entered a series of rooms that looked more like torture chambers than training facilities. Vextar saw equipment designed to simulate extreme cold, crushing pressure, toxic atmospheres, and complete sensory deprivation. This was not training. This was deliberate suffering. "What is the purpose of this?" Vextar demanded. "To teach our people that they can survive anything," Oh Sung-jun said simply. "Pain is temporary. Mission success is permanent." The first demonstration involved Cadet Nam Ye-jin, a young woman who looked too small to be a soldier. She entered a chamber filled with toxic gas while wearing a damaged breathing mask. Her mission was to repair critical equipment while slowly suffocating. Vextar watched in horror as the human cadet struggled to breathe while working with delicate electronics. Her hands shook from oxygen deprivation, but she continued the repair process. When she finally completed the task and left the chamber, she was barely conscious. "This is barbaric," Vextar protested. "You could have killed her." "That is the point," Dr. Shin Woo-jin said as he joined their group. He was the Academy's military psychologist, responsible for preparing cadets mentally for extreme situations. In real combat, our soldiers may have to choose between completing their mission and saving their own lives. No soldier should have to make that choice, Vextar argued. Every soldier will have to make that choice. Dr. Shin replied calmly. The question is whether they are prepared for it. They moved to another area where cadets were practicing resistance to interrogation. Vextar expected to see classroom instruction about keeping secrets. Instead, he witnessed actual interrogation techniques being used on human students. Cadet Han Min-ho was strapped to a chair while instructors used psychological pressure, sleep deprivation, and controlled pain to try to break his resistance. The young man had been in the chair for 12 hours, and his interrogators showed no signs of stopping. How long does this continue? Vextar asked. Until he breaks or until he proves he cannot be broken? Oh Sung-jun answered. Usually takes 2 to 3 days. Days? Vextar's skin went bright yellow. You torture your own students for days? We prepare them for what enemies will do to them, Dr. Shin explained. Real interrogation is much worse than this. If they cannot handle training, they cannot handle capture. The alien commander watched as the interrogators switched tactics. They stopped using physical pressure and began using psychological manipulation. They told Han Minho that his family was dead, that his mission had failed, that his sacrifice was meaningless. Through it all, the young human maintained his silence. But Vextar could see the cost. The cadet's eyes held a kind of desperate determination that spoke of someone holding on to sanity by pure willpower. This will damage his mind, Vextar said. Yes, Dr. Shin agreed, but it will also strengthen it. He will know that he can endure anything an enemy might do to him. They moved to a medical training area where Vextar expected to see standard first aid instruction. Instead, he found cadets practicing surgery on each other using basic tools. They were learning to operate in field conditions without proper equipment or painkillers. Cadet Yoon Da-eun was performing what looked like major surgery on another student, using nothing but a knife, some wire and alcohol. The patient was conscious and biting down on a piece of leather to keep from screaming. Is this student actually injured? Vextar asked, horrified. Training injury from yesterday, the instructor replied casually. We use real injuries for training whenever possible. Gives the best experience. Vextar watched as Yoon Da-eun worked to repair internal damage with primitive tools. Her hands were steady despite the patient's obvious pain. She had clearly done this before. How many of your students died during training? Vextar asked. Very few, Admiral Kim replied. Perhaps 1 or 2 per year. Usually from their own mistakes rather than the training itself. 1 or 2 per year. Vextar was appalled. And this is acceptable? The alternative is losing hundreds in real combat because they were not properly prepared, Captain Park said. We prefer to accept small losses now to prevent large losses later. They visited a starvation simulation where cadets were kept without food for weeks while maintaining full training schedules. The humans learned to function normally while their bodies consumed themselves for energy. They practiced making complex decisions while mentally impaired by hunger. Another area focused on isolation training. Cadets were placed in small, dark chambers for days or weeks at a time. They had to maintain their sanity while completely cut off from human contact. Some emerged from these chambers showing signs of serious psychological stress. Why do you subject them to this? Vextar asked Dr. Shin. Because real war involves all of these conditions, the psychologist explained. Soldiers get captured. They get injured far from medical help. They run out of food and supplies. They get separated from their units and must operate alone. Other species use technology to prevent these situations. And when that technology fails, Vextar found himself giving the same answer he had given before. Our technology does not fail. Dr. Shin studied him with professional interest. Commander, may I ask how your people handle soldiers who are severely injured in combat? We evacuate them immediately to medical facilities. And if evacuation is not possible, it is always possible. We have advanced medical drones and instant transportation systems. But if those systems were destroyed? Vextar felt a growing frustration with these hypothetical questions. They are not destroyed. We have backup systems and redundant technologies. I see, Dr. Shin said thoughtfully. So your military effectiveness depends entirely on maintaining technological superiority. Of course, that is how civilized warfare works. The psychologist nodded slowly. And if you fought an enemy with technology equal to or better than yours? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Vextar realized that his entire military philosophy was built on the assumption of technological dominance. Without that advantage, his people would be helpless. We maintain the most advanced military in the galaxy, he said finally. No one can match our capabilities. For now, Dr. Shin agreed. But technology changes. New species join the galactic community. Today's advantage becomes tomorrow's standard equipment. They continued through the survival facility, seeing training scenarios that grew increasingly disturbing. Humans practiced fighting while blinded, operating equipment with severe injuries and maintaining discipline while watching their comrades die. Every exercise assumed the worst possible conditions. Every scenario prepared the cadets for situations where normal procedures would fail and standard equipment would be unavailable. Your entire training program assumes total system failure. Vextar observed. Yes, Oh Seung-jun confirmed. We prepare for the day when we have nothing left but our training and our will to survive. That day will never come. It always comes, the Master Sergeant replied. In every war, there comes a moment when everything goes wrong. When your plans fail, your equipment breaks and your advantages disappear. That is when training matters most. As they prepared to leave the survival facility, Vextar saw one final demonstration that shook him to his core. A group of cadets were practicing what they called acceptable loss calculations. They were learning to decide which members of their unit should be sacrificed to save the others. The exercise involved impossible scenarios where not everyone could survive. The cadets had to choose who would stay behind to delay the enemy, who would carry the wounded, and who would continue the mission. They made these decisions calmly, mathematically, without emotion. You teach them to abandon their comrades, Vextar said with disgust. We teach them to save who they can when they cannot save everyone, Admiral Kim replied. In perfect conditions, no one needs to be left behind. But conditions are never perfect. Cadet Lee So-min was leading one of these exercises. She had just decided that 2 of her teammates would stay behind to hold a position while the others escaped. The 2 selected cadets accepted their assignment without complaint. How do you choose? Vextar asked her. Whoever can do the most damage to the enemy while buying the most time for the others, she answered. It is a tactical calculation. Do you not feel anything about sending your comrades to die? Lee So-min looked at him with those predator eyes. I feel everything, sir, but feeling does not change mathematics. 2 deaths now may prevent 20 deaths later. As they left the survival training facility, Vextar's skin had faded to a pale gray that indicated deep distress. The humans were not just training for war. They were training for wars where survival Admiral Kim led Vextar to the Academy's Strategic Studies Department, housed in a building that looked older than the others. The walls were lined with books, maps, and displays showing military campaigns from across human history. This was where future human officers learned to think about war on the largest possible scale. Professor Lim Jae-sung met them in the main lecture hall. He was an elderly human with sharp eyes and the manner of someone who had spent decades studying the worst aspects of intelligent behavior. Behind him, a large screen showed star maps of the entire galaxy. Commander Vextar, Professor Lim said with a slight bow, I understand you wish to learn about human strategic thinking. I am curious about your methods, Vextar replied cautiously. His skin had remained gray since leaving the survival facility, and nothing he had seen so far suggested it would improve. Excellent. We are just beginning a lecture on long-term strategic planning. Please observe. Cadet Ko Yunbi stood at the front of the room preparing to present her thesis project to a class of senior students. She was young but carried herself with the confidence of someone who had spent years studying the darkest possibilities of warfare. Today, I will discuss total war doctrine and its application to interstellar conflict, she announced. The question is not whether humanity will face extinction-level warfare, but how we will survive it. Vextar's skin flickered slightly. Extinction-level warfare? That seems excessive, does it? Professor Lim asked mildly. How many species in galactic history have been completely destroyed in war? The alien commander thought for a moment. Several dozen. But those were primitive species that refused to surrender when faced with superior force. Exactly, Ko Yunbi said, having overheard. They lost because they were not prepared for total war. They fought until they were defeated, then expected mercy from their conquerors. She activated the display, showing historical data about extinct civilizations. Each one had followed the same pattern: traditional warfare, decisive defeat, and then complete annihilation by the victors. Human doctrine assumes that any interstellar war will be a war of extinction, she continued. Either we destroy our enemies completely or they destroy us completely. There is no middle ground. That is barbaric thinking, Vextar protested. Civilized species fight for specific objectives, not total destruction. General Bayek In-ho entered the lecture hall at that moment. He was a retired human military leader who had planned Earth's defensive strategies during the resource wars. His presence commanded immediate attention from everyone in the room. Civilized species fight limited wars because they can afford to lose them. General Beck said as he took a seat. When your entire species faces extinction, civilization becomes a luxury you cannot afford. Ko Yunbi nodded respectfully to the general and continued her presentation. Traditional military thinking focuses on achieving victory with minimal cost. Human military thinking focuses on ensuring survival regardless of cost. She showed the class a series of strategic scenarios, each one more disturbing than the last. In every case, human forces were outnumbered and outgunned. In every case, the strategic goal was not victory but survival. Scenario 1, Ko Yunbi announced. Earth is invaded by a technologically superior force. Traditional response would be to defend the planet and attempt to repel the invaders. What is wrong with that approach? Vextar asked. It assumes the planet can be saved, she replied. Human doctrine assumes the planet is already lost. Our strategy focuses on evacuation, resource denial, and preparation for extended guerrilla warfare. The display showed plans for destroying Earth's entire infrastructure before retreating to hidden bases throughout the solar system. The goal was not to save the planet, but to make its conquest worthless while preserving human military capability. You would destroy your own homeworld? Vextar was horrified. Better to rule a galaxy of ashes than serve as slaves in a garden, General Beck quoted. That is an old human saying. Professor Lim gestured to another section of the display. Scenario 2 assumes that our solar system is completely lost. What then? Ko Yunbi explained how human military planning included protocols for fighting wars across multiple star systems simultaneously. They had prepared strategies for conflicts lasting hundreds of years, with different human populations evolving separate military cultures based on their local conditions. Most species centralize their military command, she noted. Destroy the homeworld and the resistance collapses. Human doctrine distributes command authority to prevent this vulnerability. Vextar studied the plans with growing alarm. The humans had created military strategies that could function, even if 90% of their population was destroyed. They had prepared for wars that would last longer than most species' entire civilizations. This level of preparation suggests paranoia, he observed. This level of preparation suggests experience, General Beck corrected. We have fought wars of extinction before, Commander. Against ourselves. We know what total war looks like. The lecture continued with even more disturbing scenarios. Ko Yunbi discussed strategies for fighting enemies with faster-than-light travel, advanced artificial intelligence, and weapons capable of destroying entire star systems. In each case, human doctrine assumed they would be at a severe disadvantage. The key principle, she explained, is that any advantage can be overcome through superior planning and willingness to accept casualties. What level of casualties do you consider acceptable? Vextar asked. For species survival? Any level below 100%, she answered without hesitation. The alien commander felt his skin go completely white. You would sacrifice 99% of your population to save the remaining 1%? If necessary, General Beck confirmed. 1% of humanity is still millions of individuals. Enough to rebuild our civilization and remember our enemies, Professor. Lim showed them to another area where advanced students were studying what they called asymmetric warfare theory. These cadets were learning to fight enemies who were superior in every measurable way. The strategies they developed were nothing like traditional military thinking. Instead of seeking decisive battles, they focused on making war so costly and prolonged that victory became meaningless. They studied ways to turn an enemy's advantages into weaknesses. Superior technology requires complex supply chains, one student explained. Destroy the supply chains and the technology becomes useless metal. Advanced weapons need trained operators, another added. Kill enough operators and the weapons cannot be used effectively. Vextar listened to discussion after discussion of strategies that seemed designed specifically to counter the hegemony's military advantages. It was as if the humans had studied his people and developed countermeasures for every aspect of their superiority. These tactics seem familiar, he said carefully. They should. Professor Lim replied. We have studied every major military force in the galaxy, your hegemony included. You have studied us? Vextar's skin flickered between white and yellow. Of course, know your potential enemies better than they know themselves. That is basic strategic wisdom. General Bayek gestured toward a wall display showing detailed information about hegemony military structure, equipment, and tactics. The humans knew everything about his people's armed forces, down to the maintenance schedules of individual ships. How did you obtain this information? Vextar demanded. Public sources mostly, the general replied. Military parades, recruitment materials, diplomatic communications. Amazing how much intelligence you can gather just by paying attention. Ko Yunbi approached their group with a tablet, showing her final strategic assessment. Sir, would you like to see our evaluation of hegemony military effectiveness? Vextar found himself nodding despite his growing alarm. The human student showed him an analysis that was frighteningly accurate. They had identified every strength and weakness of his people's military forces. Your conclusion? He asked. Technologically superior but strategically inflexible, she read from her notes. Heavy dependence on advanced equipment makes them vulnerable to supply disruption. Centralized command structure creates single points of failure. No experience fighting enemies with equivalent or superior technology. You believe you could defeat us? Vextar asked. We believe we could survive you, Ko Yunbi corrected, which amounts to the same thing. The strategic philosophy lecture concluded with a discussion of something the humans called victory conditions. For most species, victory meant achieving their war aims with acceptable losses. For humans, victory meant that their species continued to exist. Any war we can walk away from is a war we have won, General Bayek explained. Any war that destroys us completely is a war we have lost. Everything else is just details. As they prepared to leave the Strategic Studies Department, Professor Lim handed Vextar a datapad containing basic information about human military philosophy. Light reading, he said with a slight smile. Vextar glanced at the contents. The first chapter was titled, Preparing for Wars Against Technologically Superior Enemies. The second was, Maintaining Military Effectiveness During Species Extinction Events. You have weaponized pessimism, Vextar said slowly. We have weaponized realism, Admiral Kim replied. Hope itself required sack. As the inspection tour neared its end, Ambassador Song Min Seok joined their group. He was a smooth-talking diplomat who had been conspicuously absent during the military demonstrations. Vextar had assumed the human was simply busy with other duties. Now he realized the ambassador's timing was very deliberate. Commander Vextar, Ambassador Song said with a warm smile, I hope our academy has been educational. Educational is one word for it, Vextar replied carefully. His skin had remained white throughout the strategic philosophy lectures, and nothing suggested it would improve soon. Excellent. Perhaps we could discuss the diplomatic implications of what you have observed. They moved to a conference room that overlooked the academy's main training areas. Through the windows, Vextar could see cadets continuing their disturbing exercises. Young humans practicing to fight wars of extinction with calm professionalism. Intelligence Officer Kang Hye-rian was waiting in the conference room. She was a small woman with unremarkable features who seemed to blend into the background. Vextar barely noticed her until she began speaking. Commander, during your visit we have conducted our own inspection, she said quietly. What do you mean? Vextar asked. We have been studying you as carefully as you have been studying us, Kang Hye-rian explained. Every question you asked, every reaction you showed, every piece of equipment you carried, all of it has been analyzed. Vextar felt a chill run through his body. That is a violation of diplomatic protocol. Is it? Ambassador Song asked mildly. You came here to evaluate our military capabilities. Did you expect us not to evaluate yours? The alien commander realized he had been naive. Throughout the entire visit, he had been focused on judging human military effectiveness. He had never considered that they might be judging his. What have you concluded? He asked reluctantly. Kang Hye-rian consulted a tablet. Hegemony military doctrine is exactly as we predicted. Overwhelming technological superiority, rapid decisive engagements, psychological warfare through demonstration of advanced capabilities. There is nothing wrong with that approach. Against most enemies, no, she agreed. But your people have never fought anyone who refused to be impressed by your technology. Admiral Kim joined the conversation. Commander, may I ask you a personal question? In all your years of military service, have you ever fought an enemy who continued attacking after seeing your superior weapons? Vextar thought carefully. No. Most conflicts end when the enemy realizes they cannot win. But what if they continued fighting anyway? Ambassador Song asked. What if they decided that dying with dignity was preferable to living under occupation? The alien commander found himself unable to answer. His entire military career had been built on the assumption that rational enemies would surrender when faced with impossible odds. The idea of fighting irrational enemies had never been considered. Our analysis suggests that hegemony forces would be extremely vulnerable to prolonged resistance, Kang Hyerin continued. Your technology requires complex maintenance. Your soldiers are not trained for extended campaigns, and your command structure depends on rapid victory. Supreme Commander Ryu Sang-ho entered the conference room at that moment. He was Earth's highest military authority, a man who had planned humanity's expansion into space and its preparation for galactic contact. His presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. Commander Vextar, he said with a slight nod, I trust your inspection has been informative. Very, Vextar replied cautiously. Good, because now we need to discuss the real purpose of your visit. Supreme Commander Ryu took a seat across from Vextar. You came here to determine whether humans could contribute to hegemony military forces. But that was never the real question. What do you mean? The real question, Ambassador Song explained, was whether humans would be a useful addition to the galactic community or a dangerous threat to be eliminated. Vextar's skin went completely white. The humans had seen through the diplomatic fiction. They knew this inspection was really an evaluation for potential military action. We are a peaceful species, he protested weakly. You are a dominant species, Supreme Commander Ryu corrected. There is a difference. You maintain peace by ensuring that no one can challenge your superiority. Intelligence Officer Kang showed him another display. This one contained detailed information about hegemony expansion patterns, resource allocation, and military deployments. The humans had been studying his people for much longer than he had realized. Your historical pattern is consistent, she explained. Contact new species, evaluate their military potential, offer them junior partnership in your alliance, or destroy them if they refuse. That is not accurate, Vextar said, but his voice lacked conviction. No? Admiral Kim asked. What happened to the Kalari Confederation? The Moth Collective? The Silicon Hierarchies? Vextar knew the answer. All three species had been eliminated after refusing to accept hegemony dominance. But those had been necessary actions to maintain galactic stability. They were threats to peace, he said. They were threats to your hegemony, Supreme Commander Ryu replied. Just as we are. The humans showed him more data. They had analyzed every aspect of hegemony expansion and identified the exact criteria used to determine which species lived and which died. The evaluation checklist was frighteningly accurate. Advanced technology, no. Large population, no. Rapid reproduction, no. Strategic resources, no. Ambassador Song read from the list. By your normal standards, humans should be classified as a minor species suitable for client status. But? Vextar asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. But we have something your evaluation criteria cannot measure, Supreme Commander Ryu said. We have the absolute refusal to accept subjugation. Kang Hyerin showed him one final display. This one contained a complete analysis of his personal psychological profile, compiled from his reactions during the Academy tour. The humans had been reading him like an open book. You are terrified, she said simply, not of our weapons or our technology, but of our mindset. You realize that humans cannot be conquered in any meaningful sense. You can be destroyed, Vextar pointed out. Yes, Admiral Kim agreed, but destruction and conquest are different things. You can kill every human in the galaxy, but you cannot make us serve you. The alien commander understood now why his inspection had felt so disturbing. Every aspect of human military training was designed to counter the exact advantages his people relied upon. It was as if humans had evolved specifically to fight the hegemony. You knew we were coming, he said slowly. We knew someone like you was inevitable, Supreme Commander Ryu confirmed. Every galaxy has a dominant species that maintains order through superior force. We prepared to meet you long before we made contact. Ambassador Song leaned forward. The question now is what you will recommend to your superiors. Vextar realized he was facing an impossible choice. He could recommend peaceful relations with humanity, knowing they would eventually challenge hegemony dominance, or he could recommend military action, knowing it would result in a war unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. What do you want from me? He asked. Honesty, Supreme Commander Ryu replied. Tell your leaders exactly what you have seen here. Let them decide whether they want humans as allies or enemies. Intelligence Officer Kang handed him a data crystal. This contains detailed information about human military capabilities and strategic thinking. Consider it a gesture of good faith. Or a warning, Admiral Kim added quietly. As Vextar prepared to leave the academy, he found himself facing Cadet Lee So-min one final time. The young human who had disturbed him so much during his first day was now helping to load his equipment. Cadet, he said, may I ask you something? Of course, sir. Do you believe your species will go to war with mine? Lee So-min looked at him with those predator eyes. Sir, with respect, we have been at war with your species since the day we learned you existed. What do you mean? War is not just shooting and bombing, she explained. War is one society imposing its will on another. You came here to decide our fate without consulting us. That is an act of war. Vextar felt his skin fade to the palest possible shade. And how do you intend to respond? We intend to survive, she said simply. Everything else is just tactics. As his transport lifted off from Earth, Vextar began composing his report to the Hegemony High Command. He wrote about human military capabilities, their strategic thinking, and their absolute refusal to accept subjugation. But most importantly, he wrote about the terrifying realization that humans were not just another species to be conquered or destroyed. They were something far worse. They were competitors for galactic dominance who could not be intimidated, corrupted, or defeated through traditional means. His final recommendation was simple: offer humans full partnership in the galactic community, or prepare for a war that would reshape the galaxy. There was no middle ground with a species that considered extinction preferable to slavery. As his ship entered hyperspace, Vextar's skin remained white with fear. The humans had not threatened him or demonstrated superior weapons. They had done something far more terrifying. They had shown him a reflection of what the hegemony would look like if it were stripped of its technological advantages and forced to rely on pure determination to survive.